Before we begin, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel and comment below the time you are watching this video so we can send our best wishes and peace to you and your family members. Don't forget to comment and give us suggestions to improve better stories to serve everyone. Thank you. Story 1. The snow had come early that year, burying the small town of Ridgewell under a thick, icy blanket weeks before Halloween. The streets were eerily quiet, the usual chatter of neighbors replaced by the muffled crunch of boots on snow. I was 10 years old, desperate to prove to the older kids that I wasn't just the baby everyone thought I was. "You really want in?" Mia, the ringleader, smirked, her breath visible in the cold night air. She had a way of making even the simplest question sound like a challenge. "Yeah," I replied, my voice steady despite the nervous flutter in my stomach. "What do I have to do?" The group exchanged glances, their faces illuminated by the pale moonlight. Finally, Jake, Mia's shadow and the group's enforcer, leaned closer. "Go to the Miller house." "Alone?" The Miller house. Everyone in town knew about it. Perched at the edge of the woods, the abandoned mansion loomed like a dark specter over Ridgewell's otherwise quaint skyline. Rumors of strange lights and voices surrounded it, and no one dared venture near. "It's just a house," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Mia grinned, her teeth bright against the shadow of her scarf. "Exactly. But if it's just a house, then it should be easy, right?" Before I could second-guess myself, I nodded. "Fine. When?" "Now," Jake said, his voice almost a growl. The group led me to the edge of the woods, stopping where the snow-covered trees thinned out to reveal the silhouette of the Miller house. Its shutters hung crooked, the roof sagged, and the windows reflected the moonlight like hollow eyes. "We'll wait here," Mia said, crossing her arms. "All you have to do is go inside, get to the living room, and bring back something to prove you were there." "Like what?" "You'll know it when you see it," she said cryptically. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I approached the house. Each step felt heavier, not just from the snow but from the weight of their eyes on my back. The air grew colder the closer I got, and an unsettling silence replaced the wind's howl. The front door was ajar, creaking slightly in the faint breeze. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly, and the air smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing torn wallpaper and broken furniture scattered across the floor. "Just grab something and go," I muttered to myself, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Hello?" a voice called, soft and childlike. I froze, the beam of my flashlight shaking as I scanned the room. "Is someone there?" I asked, my voice trembling. Silence. "Hello?" the voice repeated, clearer this time. It came from deeper within the house. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I followed it. The living room was as decrepit as the rest of the house, but the voice was gone. Instead, my flashlight fell on a small, ornate music box sitting on the mantel. It was out of place, pristine amidst the decay. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the cold metal, when a faint giggle echoed from behind me. Spinning around, I saw nothing but the faint outline of the hallway I'd come through. "This isn't funny," I said, hoping the older kids had followed me inside to play a prank. "Why are you here?" the voice asked again, closer now. It didn't sound like any of my friends. I clutched the music box and bolted back toward the door. But the hallway stretched longer than I remembered. The door seemed farther away with every step. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that moved even when I didn't. "You shouldn't have taken it," the voice whispered, right by my ear. I turned sharply, but no one was there. My flashlight went out completely, plunging me into darkness. Panic set in as I stumbled forward, my breath visible in the frigid air. Then, I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes, watching me from the end of the hallway. "Leave it," the voice commanded, no longer childlike. It was deep, resonant, and filled with an anger that chilled me to my core. I dropped the music box, the sound of it hitting the floor echoing unnaturally loud. The eyes blinked once, and then they were gone. The door reappeared before me as if it had always been there. I didn't question it. I ran. When I burst outside, the group was gone. Only their footprints in the snow remained, leading back toward town. The next morning, I found Mia and Jake at school. "Nice try with the pranks," I said, forcing a laugh to cover my lingering fear. They exchanged confused glances. "What are you talking about?" Jake asked. "The voices in the house, the eyes. You guys planned that, right?" Mia frowned. "We never went inside. We thought you'd chicken out." The blood drained from my face. "But, the music box." Mia's eyes widened. "What music box?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. That night, as I lay in bed, the silence of the snowstorm outside was broken by a familiar sound, the faint, haunting melody of a music box playing just outside my window. Story 2. The snowstorm had been raging for hours, turning the small town of Maple Ridge into a ghostly, white abyss. The roads were impassable, and most people had retreated to the warmth of their homes. But not Maya and me. We were stuck at her house for the weekend, a creaky, old place on the outskirts of town, bordered by woods that always seemed darker than they should be. "This storm is crazy," I said, pressing my hands against the frosted window. The backyard was barely visible, a swirling void of snow and wind. Maya grinned, her mischievous energy undimmed by the weather. "It's perfect. You know what we need to do?" I already regretted asking, but curiosity got the better of me. "What?" She leaned in, her eyes gleaming. "We're going to the hunter's shed." My stomach dropped. The hunter's shed was a local legend, an old, dilapidated structure at the edge of the woods, said to be cursed. Stories of strange noises and figures lurking around it were enough to keep most people away. "You're joking," I said, hoping she was. "Come on, Lucy," Maya said, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. "It'll be fun. Besides, it's just a dumb story." "A dumb story where people disappear?" I shot back. She shrugged, already pulling on her boots. "No one's disappeared lately. Let's go." Despite every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I found myself bundling up and following her into the storm. The wind howled like a living thing, and the snow stung my face, but Maya moved confidently, her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the chaos. "You've been here before, right?" I asked, struggling to keep up. "Once, during the day," she said. "It's creepy, sure, but nothing happened." "Nothing happened yet," I muttered under my breath. When the shed finally came into view, my unease deepened. It was smaller than I'd imagined, barely more than a shack, with a sagging roof and warped wooden walls. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. "See? Totally harmless," Maya said, but her voice wavered slightly. "Let's just look and leave," I said, gripping her arm. We stepped inside, and the air seemed heavier, colder. The shed was empty except for a few rusted tools and a pile of old blankets in the corner. A strange, metallic smell lingered in the air. "Nothing here," Maya said, sweeping her flashlight around. "Then let's go," I said quickly, but Maya's light had stopped on the pile of blankets. "Wait. What's that?" she whispered. Before I could stop her, she reached out and pulled the top blanket away. Beneath it was a small wooden box, carved with intricate symbols I didn't recognize. "Maya, don't." But she was already opening it. Inside was a single, rusted key in a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully, her brow furrowing as she read. "What does it say?" I asked, my voice barely audible. It's coordinates, she said, her voice shaking slightly. And it's signed with an initial. Just H. Coordinates? For what? I pressed, my voice rising in pitch. Maya frowned. I don't know. But why leave something like this here? A sudden bang made us both jump. The door had slammed shut, though there was no wind strong enough to do it. That's not funny, I said, glaring at her, but Maya looked just as startled. I didn't do anything, she said, her flashlight shaking slightly in her hand. Then came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the shed. Who's there? Maya called, her voice cracking. No answer. Just more footsteps, now accompanied by the faint sound of humming. It was a tune I didn't recognize, but something about it made my skin crawl. We need to leave. Now, I said, pulling at her sleeve. What if someone's out there, she whispered. Exactly. Let's not wait to find out who. Before we could move, the humming stopped. The footsteps stopped. The silence was suffocating. Then, from outside the window, a face appeared, pale, gaunt, with eyes that seemed too large for its skull. It stared at us, unblinking, before breaking into a slow, unnatural smile. I screamed, grabbing Maya's arm and yanking her toward the door. Wait! Maya protested. We need to grab the box. Leave it! I shouted, dragging her along as she clutched the wooden box tightly. The door creaked open, and the moment we stepped outside, the snow seemed to swallow all sound. The wind had stopped, replaced by an eerie, muffled stillness. But then, from behind us, the humming began again, louder this time, accompanied by something else, the crunch of snow under heavy footsteps. It's following us, Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. Don't look back. Just run. I urged, gripping her hand tightly as we stumbled through the snow. Lucy, Maya gasped, slowing down. I can't, it's too cold. We're almost there. I lied, the lights of her house still a faint glimmer in the distance. The humming grew louder, almost deafening, until it seemed to come from every direction. I risked a glance over my shoulder and froze. The figure was there, gliding through the snow, its face expressionless now, but its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. It wasn't walking, it was moving too smoothly, like it was being carried by the wind itself. Maya, move! I shouted, yanking her forward. When we finally burst through the door of Maya's house, we collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. What the hell was that? Maya whispered, clutching the box tightly. Why did you take it? I snapped. She looked at the box, her face pale. I don't know. I just had to. Had to? Are you serious? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. That thing was following us because of it. You think it's because of this? Maya said, staring at the carved symbols on the lid. Her fingers trembled as she ran them over the intricate designs. It's just a box. Then get rid of it. Maya hesitated, then shook her head. Not yet. I need to figure out what it means. That night, as the storm raged on, we tried to convince ourselves it was over. But just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it again, the humming, faint but unmistakable, coming from just outside the window. And when I turned to look, I swore I saw the same pale face, smiling at me through the glass. Story 3. The snowstorm began as the sun dipped below the horizon, blanketing the small town of River Hollow in a suffocating white silence. Ellie and I were supposed to stay inside that night, but Halloween was sacred to her. At 9 years old, she had been dreaming about showing off her sparkling witch costume for weeks. Please, Oliver, she begged, her voice muffled by the scarf wrapped tightly around her face. It's just one house. I promise. I sighed, tightening my grip on her mittened hand. Alright, one house. Then we go straight back home, okay? Her eyes lit up, and she practically dragged me down the icy street, her tiny feet crunching through the snow with enthusiasm. The wind howled around us, whipping through the skeletal trees lining the road. Most of the houses were dark, the storm keeping families safely tucked inside. But up ahead, a single house stood out, its porch light glowing warmly through the snow. That one! Ellie cried, pointing at the house. It was old, its paint peeling and the windows fogged with frost. Something about it felt off. Ellie, maybe we should. Trick or treat, she yelled, running up the creaking steps before I could stop her. I followed reluctantly, every nerve on edge as I scanned the empty street. The door opened almost immediately, revealing a tall man with a thin face and deep-set eyes. His smile was wide but didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, aren't you a brave little witch?" he said, his voice smooth but unsettling. "And who's your protector?" "I'm her brother," I said quickly, pulling Ellie a step closer to me. The man chuckled, reaching into a large bowl. Of course. Here you go." He dropped a handful of candy into Ellie's bag. "Be careful out there. The storm has a mind of its own." Ellie beamed, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. I muttered a quick thank you and guided her back down the steps. As we walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on us. Glancing back, I saw him still standing in the doorway, watching, his smile fading into something darker. That was fun. "Can we do one more?" Ellie asked, but her excitement faltered when she saw my face. "Ollie?" "No," I said firmly, gripping her hand tighter. "We're going home. Now." The wind picked up, swirling the snow around us in a blinding flurry. I could barely see a few feet ahead. Ellie's laughter broke the tension as she tried to catch the snowflakes on her tongue, but my unease grew with every step. Something wasn't right. The streets were too quiet, the storm too loud. "What's that?" Ellie suddenly stopped, pointing at a dark figure standing at the corner ahead of us. My heart sank. The man from the house. He was still, too still, like a shadow frozen in time. "Ellie, we're taking a different route," I said, steering her down a side street. But as we turned the corner, the figure was there again, standing under a flickering streetlight. "Ollie, how did he?" Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't look," I said, pulling her along faster. My pulse was pounding in my ears. The storm seemed to close in around us, the wind carrying faint whispers I couldn't quite make out. "Oliver," Ellie said, her voice barely audible. "He's following us." I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the figure moving now, his steps slow but deliberate. His long coat trailed behind him, and his head tilted slightly as though studying us. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Ellie with me as we sprinted through the snow. The icy wind bit at my face, and my lungs burned with each breath. The sound of footsteps echoed behind us, too close and too steady. We reached Mrs. Howard's house, her warm porch light a beacon in the storm. I banged on the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Mrs. Howard! Open the door!" The door creaked open, and Mrs. Howard's kind face appeared, lined with concern. "Goodness, children! What's wrong?" "Someone's following us." I gasped, pushing Ellie inside. Mrs. Howard's eyes darted to the street, but there was nothing there. She quickly locked the door, pulling the curtains closed. "You're safe now. Let me call your mother." Ellie clung to me, her small frame trembling. "Ollie, he was right there." "I know," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the window. For a while, there was only the sound of the wind rattling the house. But then, a single knock echoed through the silence. We all froze. "Who is it?" Mrs. Howard called, her voice steady but tight. A familiar voice answered, calm and chilling. Sorry to bother you. My kids ran off in the storm. Have you seen them? My blood turned to ice. Ellie's grip on my arm tightened. Mrs. Howard didn't respond, her hand hovering over the phone. They're not your kids, I whispered. There was silence, then a low chuckle. Suit yourself, the voice said. The sound of footsteps crunching in the snow faded into the distance. The police came an hour later, but they found no footprints, no sign of anyone near the house. Mrs. Howard stayed with us until our mom arrived, but even in her warmth, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man wasn't gone. That night, as the storm finally began to die down, I lay awake in bed, staring at the window. The snow had stopped, but the glass was fogged, obscuring the view outside. And just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard it again, a single knock, soft and deliberate. This time, I didn't dare look. Story 4. The storm hit faster than any of us expected. One moment, we were hiking through the snow-dusted trails of ridge pine forest, and the next, the world had turned into a swirling white nightmare. The wind howled like a wild animal, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. We need to find shelter, Claire shouted over the wind, her voice barely carrying. She was the most experienced among us, and none of us argued. I squinted through the snow, my breath freezing in the air. There. I pointed to the faint outline of a cabin in the distance, barely visible through the storm. Thank God, Ethan muttered, his teeth chattering. We trudged toward it, each step a battle against the wind and snow. The cabin was small and weather-beaten, but it was solid. Claire pushed the door open with some effort, and we spilled inside, grateful for the respite from the storm. The air was cold, but at least we were out of the wind. This place looks ancient, Ethan said, shining his flashlight around. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a single wooden table, 2 rickety chairs, and a stone hearth that looked like it hadn't been used in years. Better than freezing to death, Claire replied, already pulling off her snow-soaked gloves. We'll stay here until the storm passes. I glanced around uneasily. Something about the cabin felt wrong. The shadows in the corners seemed too deep, and the air had a strange heaviness to it, like the place was holding its breath. Anyone else feel that? I asked, my voice hushed. Feel what? Claire asked, her tone sharp. She hated when I got superstitious. It's just weird in here, I said, shrugging. Like we're not alone. Ethan chuckled nervously. Don't start with the ghost stories, man. Not now. I'm serious, I said, but Claire waved me off. Let's focus on staying warm, she said, kneeling by the hearth. Ethan, see if you can find some wood outside. Nick, help me get this fire going. Ethan groaned but obeyed, grabbing his flashlight and stepping back into the storm. I worked with Claire to clear the hearth and found a few scraps of old wood piled in a corner. As the fire sputtered to life, the cabin seemed to grow darker rather than brighter. That's odd, Claire muttered, staring at the flames. They flickered unnaturally, casting shadows that danced and twisted on the walls. What the hell? Ethan's voice came from outside, muffled but panicked. Claire and I exchanged a look before rushing to the door. We found Ethan standing just outside, his flashlight beam fixed on the ground. What is it? Claire asked. Footprints, Ethan said, his voice shaking. They're fresh. And they're leading, here. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. The prints were unmistakable, large, human, and heading straight for the cabin. But there were no other signs of life. Maybe it's just some hunter, Claire said, though she didn't sound convinced. Then where are they? Ethan snapped. We stood there in silence, the wind howling around us. Finally, Claire took a deep breath. Let's go inside. We'll block the door, just in case. Back in the cabin, we barricaded the door with the table and chairs. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, doing little to dispel the cold. The shadows seemed to grow bolder, stretching toward us as if alive. "We need to stay calm," Claire said, though her eyes darted nervously to the corners of the room. "Calm?" Ethan said, his voice rising. "Something's out there. Or maybe it's already in here." "Don't," I said, glancing at the darkened corners. "Don't even say that." A loud thud interrupted us, the sound coming from the roof. We froze, staring at each other. "What the hell was that?" Ethan whispered. "It's just the storm," Claire said, though her voice wavered. Another thud, louder this time, made us all flinch. "Storms don't move," Ethan said, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. Suddenly, the fire in the hearth went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled for my flashlight, its weak beam barely cutting through the shadows. "Claire?" I called, my voice trembling. "I'm here," she said, but her voice sounded distant, like she was far away. "Where's Ethan?" No answer. I swung my flashlight around, but the beam only revealed empty space. The shadows seemed to writhe and shift, closing in on me. "Ethan!" I shouted, but only the wind answered. Then I heard it, a low, guttural whisper, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Leave." My blood ran cold. "Claire, we need to get out of here," I said, backing toward the door. "I don't think we can," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look." I turned my flashlight toward the door and froze. The footprints we'd seen outside were now inside the cabin, leading from the door to the center of the room, and then disappearing. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Leave now." Without thinking, I grabbed Claire's arm and yanked her toward the door. The barricade toppled with a crash, and we stumbled outside into the storm. The wind was deafening, the snow blinding, but we didn't stop. We ran until we couldn't feel our legs, until the cabin was far behind us. When we finally made it back to town, Ethan was waiting for us at the ranger station. He was pale, shaking, and refused to tell us how he'd gotten there. None of us ever spoke about what happened in that cabin. But sometimes, on stormy nights, I think about the footprints and the shadows, and I swear I can still hear the whisper. "Leave." Story 5. The snow had been falling all day, covering the cemetery in a pristine, quiet white. Bonewood Cemetery wasn't the kind of place anyone visited in the winter, not unless they had to. But I had a reason. My brother, Sam, had been buried there last fall, and I visited him every week, no matter the weather. "Are you sure you want to go today?" Mom asked, her tone heavy with concern. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, glancing out at the thick snowflakes drifting from the sky. "I'll be fine," I said, pulling on my coat. I'd made the trek dozens of times before. Besides, it was better than sitting at home, staring at the empty chair Sam used to occupy. "Just be careful," Mom said, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The cemetery was a 15-minute walk from our house, and the path was well worn, even in the snow. As I reached the rusted iron gates, a sense of unease settled over me. Bonewood always had that effect. The ancient gravestones jutted from the snow like jagged teeth, their inscriptions worn smooth by time. Today, though, the silence felt heavier, like the cemetery itself was holding its breath. "Hey, Sam," I said softly as I reached his grave. I brushed the snow off the headstone, revealing his name etched into the cold granite. "Mom's worried about me coming out here, but I had to. You'd understand." I stood there for a while, letting the quiet envelop me. But then, faintly, I heard it, a low hum, almost like a distant song carried on the wind. I turned, scanning the cemetery. There was no one there. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding small against the vast emptiness. The hum stopped. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just the wind. You shouldn't be here. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. A boy about my age stood a few feet away, his pale face framed by dark, messy hair. He wasn't dressed for the weather, no coat, no gloves, just a thin sweater that looked soaked through. "Who are you?" I demanded, stepping back instinctively. He tilted his head, his dark eyes unreadable. "You have to leave. Before it gets dark." "What are you talking about?" I asked, glancing around. "Are you lost?" He didn't answer, his gaze fixed on something behind me. "It's already watching you." A chill ran down my spine, and I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just rows of graves, their snow-covered markers blending into the white landscape. When I turned back, the boy was gone. I'd always been brave enough to face the cemetery alone, but something about his words made my resolve waver. I decided it was time to head home. As I started walking, though, the air seemed to grow colder, the silence more oppressive. The path I'd taken into the cemetery was gone, swallowed by the snow. "This isn't funny," I muttered, picking up my pace. The hum started again, louder this time, almost melodic. I turned in circles, trying to pinpoint the source, but it was everywhere and nowhere at once. "Sam?" I called out, irrationally hoping for a response. The wind picked up, and I swore I heard my name whispered within it. "You won't find the way out," the boy's voice said, suddenly beside me. I jumped, stumbling back. He stood there again, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "The cemetery doesn't like visitors after dark," he said, his voice almost sad. "It keeps them." "Who's them?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. Instead of answering, he pointed toward a crypt at the far edge of the cemetery. Its stone door was slightly ajar, and faint light seeped through the cracks. "You need to go there," he said. "It's the only way out." "Why should I trust you?" I asked, but he was already walking away, his figure disappearing into the snow. I stood there, torn between running and following his advice. The hum was louder now, almost deafening, and the shadows around the grave seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. With no other options, I ran toward the crypt. The stone door groaned as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the small chamber. Inside, the air was strangely warm, and the light came from a single candle burning on an ancient altar. Carved symbols covered the walls, and in the center of the room lay an open book. "What is this?" I whispered to myself, stepping closer. The book's pages were filled with handwriting, the words scrawled in a language I couldn't understand. But one thing was clear, my name, written over and over again. The hum turned into a low growl, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. A figure stood in the doorway, its features obscured by shadows but its eyes glowing faintly. "You were warned," it said, its voice layered and unnatural. I backed away, bumping into the altar. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "To keep you," it said, stepping closer. I grabbed the candle and swung it toward the figure, but it didn't flinch. The flame extinguished, plunging the crypt into darkness. The last thing I remember is the cold, a suffocating, bone-deep chill that pulled me under. When I woke up, I was outside the cemetery gates, lying in the snow. The storm had passed, and the sun was rising. I stumbled home, my head spinning. When I told Mom what happened, she looked at me like I was crazy. "You must have gotten turned around in the storm," she said. But I knew better. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the hum again, faint but unmistakable, coming from just outside my window. And in the frost on the glass, there was a single word written in jagged letters: "Stay." Story 6. The snowstorm hit just after sundown, a violent blizzard that erased the forest trail in minutes. I was leading the group, Claire and Ethan trailing behind me as we trudged through knee-deep snow. What started as a casual hike had turned into a desperate search for shelter. "This is insane," Ethan said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "We should have turned back hours ago. And risk getting lost in the dark?" Claire shot back. She was always the pragmatic one. "We'll find a cabin or something. There's got to be something out here." As if on cue, a faint light appeared in the distance. I stopped, pointing toward it. "There. Do you see that?" Claire nodded, squinting through the flurries. "Looks like a cabin." "Let's go," Ethan urged, his teeth chattering. We moved toward the light, the promise of warmth giving us a burst of energy. The cabin loomed out of the snow, small and weathered but intact. A single lantern hung by the door, its flame flickering against the storm. "Someone's here," Claire said, her breath fogging in the icy air. "We'll explain the situation. They'll let us stay until morning." I knocked on the door, the sound echoing strangely in the storm. A moment later, it creaked open. No one stood on the other side. "Hello?" I called, stepping inside. The cabin was dimly lit by a few candles, their flames casting long, flickering shadows. It was empty. "That's weird," Ethan muttered, closing the door behind us. "Where's the person who lit the lantern?" "Maybe they're out," Claire suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Let's just wait. Whoever owns this place will come back." The cabin was simple, a table, a couple of chairs, and a fireplace stacked with logs. Claire knelt by the hearth, striking a match to light the fire. Soon, the room was filled with the comforting crackle of flames. "This is better," Ethan said, rubbing his hands together. "We'll be fine here for the night." But something about the cabin felt wrong. The shadows cast by the fire danced too erratically, stretching toward us like grasping fingers. The air was thick, heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang. "Do you hear that?" I asked suddenly, my ears straining. A faint sound, almost like a low hum, seemed to emanate from the walls. Claire froze, glancing at me. "It's probably the wind." "No," Ethan said, his voice low. "That's not wind." The sound grew louder, a rhythmic thrumming that made my chest tighten. Claire stood, her hand gripping the back of the chair. "What's causing that?" Before anyone could answer, the door slammed open with a deafening bang. Snow swirled into the cabin, and a figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. Tall, gaunt, and wrapped in a tattered cloak, it stepped inside without hesitation. "Who are you?" Claire demanded, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it reached up with a hand that seemed too long, its fingers gnarled and claw-like. It pointed at the table. "Leave," it rasped, its voice a hollow echo that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "We're just taking shelter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll leave in the morning." The figure tilted its head, as if considering my words. Then it pointed again, this time at the fireplace. The flames flickered wildly before extinguishing entirely, plunging the room into darkness. "I don't like this," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. The hum returned, louder now, vibrating through the floorboards. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow but deliberate. I stumbled back, my foot hitting something hard. Looking down, I saw a trapdoor embedded in the floor, its edges barely visible in the dim light. "What's down there?" Claire asked, noticing my gaze. The figure stopped, standing motionless as we stared at the trapdoor. The hum seemed to be coming from below. "We need to go," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "Not yet," Claire said, kneeling to lift the trapdoor. A cold, damp draft wafted up as she opened it, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down. "Are you insane?" Ethan hissed. "We're not going down there." "We need to know what's causing this," Claire said, her voice firm. She grabbed a lantern from the table and descended into the darkness. "Claire, wait!" I called, but she was already gone. Ethan and I exchanged a panicked glance before following her. The staircase creaked under our weight, the hum growing louder with each step. At the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, circular room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the stone and glowing faintly. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Claire didn't answer. She was staring at the center of the room, where a large, black stone sat, pulsing faintly with light. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through my entire body. "We shouldn't be here," Ethan said, backing toward the stairs. "We need to leave." The figure appeared at the top of the stairs, blocking our escape. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly, locking onto us. "You've seen too much," it said, its voice reverberating through the chamber. The symbols on the walls began to writhe, their glow intensifying. The hum turned into a deafening roar, and the room seemed to close in around us. "Run!" Claire shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The light from the black stone enveloped us, and the last thing I saw was the figure stepping into the room, its shadow stretching impossibly long. When I woke up, I was lying in the snow outside the cabin. The storm had passed, and the forest was silent. Ethan and Claire were beside me, unconscious but breathing. The cabin was gone, leaving nothing but untouched snow. We never spoke about what happened that night. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I hear the hum again, faint and distant. And I know the cabin is still out there, waiting. Story 7. The wind howled through the barren forest, snow swirling like white ghosts in the icy air. Our group of 4 had been hiking for hours, the storm making every step feel like an eternity. "We need to find shelter," Alex said, his voice barely audible over the roaring wind. He'd taken the lead, his flashlight cutting weakly through the blizzard. "I thought this was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway," Lisa muttered, her teeth chattering. She clung to her scarf, trying to shield her face from the biting cold. "No one planned the storm, Lisa," Claire snapped, trudging just behind her. Always the practical one, Claire had been the one who suggested we try and wait out the storm rather than turn back. "There!" I called, spotting the faint outline of a cabin through the trees. Relief surged through me. We made our way to the structure, its silhouette growing clearer with each step. The cabin was old, its wooden frame weathered and darkened by time. Snow piled high against its walls, but a faint flicker of light from one of the windows promised warmth. Alex reached the door first, knocking sharply. "Hello? Is anyone here?" No response. He tried the handle, and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. A fire burned low in the stone hearth, and the room smelled faintly of pine and something metallic. "This is weird," Lisa said, stepping inside cautiously. "Who leaves a fire burning and no one home?" "Maybe they'll be back," Claire reasoned. "We'll explain when they return. Right now, we need to get warm." We closed the door against the storm, the sudden quiet almost unsettling. The cabin was simple, a table with 2 chairs, a threadbare couch, and a small kitchen area. A single hallway led to what we assumed were bedrooms. "This feels wrong," Lisa said, rubbing her arms as she glanced around. "Like we shouldn't be here. Would you rather freeze outside?" Claire asked, her tone sharp. "Enough," Alex said, taking off his coat. "We'll rest here for the night and leave at first light." I walked to the fireplace, adding a log from the stack beside it. The flames leapt higher, casting long shadows on the walls. That's when I noticed it, a photograph sitting on the mantel. It showed a family of 4, their faces stern and unsmiling. The edges of the photo were worn, as though it had been handled frequently. "Creepy," I muttered, setting it back. "What is?" Lisa asked, leaning over my shoulder. When she saw the photo, her face paled. That wasn't here when we came in. What are you talking about? Alex asked, joining us. She's right, Lisa insisted. I looked at the mantel when we came in. It was empty. Before anyone could respond, a loud thud echoed from the hallway. We all froze, exchanging nervous glances. Did you hear that? Claire whispered. Probably the wind, Alex said, though his voice wavered. That wasn't the wind, Lisa said. Someone's here. Alex grabbed a flashlight, leading the way down the hallway. The rest of us followed, every creak of the floorboards making my heart pound harder. The hallway ended in 2 doors. Alex pushed one open, revealing a small bedroom. It was empty. The second door opened to a larger room. At first glance, it looked like another bedroom, but the bed was neatly made, and a thick layer of dust coated the furniture. In the corner of the room stood a rocking chair, its back facing us. There's nothing here, Alex said, stepping inside. As he spoke, the chair began to rock, its motion slow and deliberate. Oh my God, Lisa whispered, backing away. Hello? Alex called, his voice shaking. He stepped closer to the chair, reaching out to touch it. Don't. Claire warned, but it was too late. The moment Alex's fingers brushed the wood, the room went dark. The fire in the main room extinguished, and the temperature plummeted. What the hell? Alex shouted, fumbling for his flashlight. Its beam flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows on the walls. A low, guttural whisper filled the room, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. The chair stopped rocking. We need to leave, Lisa said, her voice trembling. We can't go back into the storm, Claire argued, though she sounded just as scared. The whispering grew louder, words we couldn't understand. Then, slowly, the chair turned to face us. Sitting in it was a figure, its features obscured by darkness, but its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Get out, it said, its voice layered and unnatural. We didn't need to be told twice. We bolted from the room, racing back to the main area. The door was wide open, snow blowing inside. Outside, the storm had stopped, the night eerily quiet. We ran into the forest, not stopping until the cabin was far behind us. When we finally reached the edge of the woods, I turned back. The cabin was gone, replaced by an unbroken expanse of snow. None of us spoke about what happened that night. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear the faint creak of a rocking chair, and I know we were never meant to find that cabin. Story 8. The blizzard had come out of nowhere, a whiteout swallowing the road in minutes. Our car slid to a stop, buried in snow halfway through the mountain pass. There was no chance of going forward or back. The only option was to wait out the storm. That's when Claire spotted the mansion. Look over there, she said, pointing through the flurries. At first, I thought she was imagining it, but then I saw it, a sprawling old house perched on a hill, its silhouette barely visible through the snow. A faint, flickering light glowed from one of the windows. We'll freeze if we stay here, Ethan said, shivering in the back seat. Let's check it out. Or it could be worse inside, Lisa muttered, hugging herself. She had been against this road trip from the start, and the storm wasn't helping. Do you have a better idea? Claire snapped. With no other options, we bundled up and trudged through the snow toward the mansion. The closer we got, the more imposing it seemed. It was enormous, with Gothic spires and intricate stonework now worn and cracked by time. The front door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. This feels like a bad idea, Lisa said, stopping at the threshold. We'll just stay until the storm lets up, I said, stepping inside. It's probably abandoned. The foyer was grand but decayed. A massive chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, its crystals dusty and dull. The air was stale, and the faint scent of mildew mixed with something metallic. "Hello?" Claire called, her voice echoing. No answer. "Let's find a fire," Ethan said, rubbing his hands together. "It's freezing in here." We wandered through the mansion, marveling at its eerie beauty. The walls were lined with faded portraits, their subjects staring down at us with blank, glassy eyes. A grand staircase spiraled upward, disappearing into darkness. In one of the rooms, we found a fireplace already lit, the flames crackling warmly. "Who lit this?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "Does it matter?" Ethan said, kneeling in front of it. "It's warm." Reluctantly, we gathered around the fire. The heat was a welcome relief, but the unease lingered. "This place doesn't feel abandoned," Lisa said, her eyes darting to the shadows. "Someone's been here recently." "If they show up, we'll explain," Claire said. "We're not here to cause trouble." As the storm raged outside, we explored more of the mansion. The further we ventured, the stranger things became. In one room, we found a piano that played a single, haunting note when Ethan brushed against it. In another, a long dining table was set with plates of rotting food, as if a feast had been abandoned mid-meal. "This place is straight out of a horror movie," Ethan joked, but his laughter was forced. "Let's stick together," Claire said firmly. "No one goes anywhere alone." Despite her warning, the unease grew. Doors creaked open on their own, and faint whispers echoed through the halls, too soft to make out but impossible to ignore. In one of the bedrooms, I found a diary on the bedside table. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting elegant but hurried. "Listen to this," I said, reading aloud. "The house watches. It knows. We cannot leave." "Okay, I'm done," Lisa said, heading for the door. "We're leaving." "Into the storm?" Claire asked. "You wouldn't make it 10 feet. "Then we stay in one room," Lisa said. "Together. I'm not wandering this place anymore." We returned to the room with the fireplace, but the fire was out, leaving the room colder than ever. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows seemed to shift and stretch unnaturally. "Who's there?" Claire demanded, her voice breaking. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and gaunt, its face obscured by a veil of darkness. It pointed to the door. "Leave," it said, its voice a low, guttural rasp. "We can't," Claire said, stepping forward. "The storm." "Leave," it repeated, louder this time. Suddenly, the chandelier above us shook violently, its crystals clinking like wind chimes. The whispers turned into screams, and the portraits on the walls seemed to twist, their expressions warping into terror. "Run!" Ethan shouted, bolting for the door. We followed, the mansion seeming to close in around us. The walls groaned, and the floorboards buckled as if the house itself were alive. We burst into the storm, the cold biting into our skin. Behind us, the mansion's lights flickered and went out. When we looked back, it was gone, replaced by an unbroken expanse of snow. None of us spoke on the way back to the car. The storm had eased, and the road was visible again. But something lingered in the air, a heavy silence that followed us home. I still dream about the mansion. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the whispers again, faint and far away. And I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for its next visitors. Story 9. The storm had come without warning, blotting out the world in a furious cascade of snow and wind. We were stranded, our car hopelessly stuck on a desolate mountain road. Ahead of us, barely visible through the storm, loomed a towering structure, an old mansion, its dark silhouette framed by the chaos of the blizzard. "We're not staying out here," Claire said, her voice resolute as she pulled her coat tighter around herself. "That house is our best bet." Lisa hesitated, her breath visible in the freezing air. "It looks creepy. Like something out of a horror movie. And freezing to death doesn't? Ethan snapped, already trudging toward the mansion. Let's go. The path to the house was treacherous, the snow swallowing our boots with every step. By the time we reached the front door, my fingers were numb, and the cold had seeped into my bones. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently in the wind. That's not unsettling at all, Lisa muttered. Let's just get inside, Claire said, pushing the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the cavernous interior. The foyer was massive, with a grand staircase spiraling upward and a chandelier hanging precariously from the ceiling. Dust covered every surface, and the air was thick with a musty, metallic smell. Hello? Ethan called, his voice reverberating off the walls. No response. This place is huge, I said, shining my flashlight around. The beam illuminated faded paintings on the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow us as we moved. I don't like this, Lisa said, her voice trembling. Let's just stay in one room until the storm passes. Claire nodded. We'll find a fireplace. Maybe there's some wood left. We explored cautiously, sticking together as we moved through the mansion. The rooms were eerily well preserved, as though their occupants had left in a hurry and never returned. In one room, we found a fireplace with a stack of old logs beside it. Perfect, Ethan said, kneeling to start a fire. The flames roared to life, casting flickering shadows across the room. At least it's warm, Claire said, sitting close to the fire. But the warmth did little to dispel the unease that clung to the air. The shadows seemed to dance unnaturally, stretching and twisting along the walls. And then there was the sound, a faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing. Did you hear that? Lisa asked, her eyes wide. It's probably the wind, I said, though I didn't believe it. The whisper grew louder, more distinct. It was coming from the hallway. Stay here, Claire said, grabbing the flashlight. I'll check it out. You're not going alone, Ethan said, standing. I'm coming with you. Lisa and I stayed by the fire, the whispers echoing around us. Minutes felt like hours as we waited. Finally, Claire and Ethan returned, their faces pale. What did you find? I asked. Nothing, Claire said, though her voice wavered. Just, nothing. But I could tell they were lying. Before I could press them, the fire suddenly died, plunging the room into darkness. What the hell? Lisa cried, fumbling for her flashlight. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. Shadows swirled around us, coalescing into a figure at the edge of the room. It was tall and gaunt, its face obscured by darkness but its eyes glowing faintly. Leave, it said, its voice a guttural rasp. We can't, Claire said, her voice trembling. The storm. Leave, it repeated, stepping closer. The air grew colder, the metallic smell stronger. The chandelier above us began to sway, its crystals clinking ominously. We're going, Ethan said, grabbing Lisa's arm. Come on. We bolted for the door, the mansion seeming to close in around us. The walls groaned, and the floor buckled beneath our feet. Shadows chased us, their whispers turning into guttural screams. We burst into the storm, the snow stinging our faces as we ran. When we finally stopped to catch our breath, the mansion was gone. Behind us, there was only an unbroken expanse of snow. Where did it go? Lisa whispered, her voice shaking. None of us had an answer. We made it back to the car, the storm miraculously easing. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't truly escaped. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear the whispers, faint and far away. Like the mansion is calling us back.